The first sign that the day was going to be strange was when docking bay 12 went completely silent. Waystation Dural was never silent. It was a transit hub at the edge of Accord space, and it hummed and groaned and beeped at all hours. Fuel lines hissed. Cargo loaders scraped metal floors. Traders argued in 4 languages at once. Silence was not something Waystation Dural did. But Bay 12 went silent, and Inspection Officer Devlin Ward stood in the middle of it with his scanner hanging at his side and forgot entirely what he was supposed to be scanning. The cargo shuttle that had docked 20 minutes ago was old, the kind of old that should not have made it through a jump gate without pieces falling off. It had no registered owner, no filed flight plan, and no crew. The manifest was a single handwritten note tucked inside the airlock panel that said, in extremely careful and slightly wrong standard human, 1 passenger going to find Orin. The passenger was currently sitting on the Bay 12 floor. It was a dragon. Not the large, fire-breathing sort from old Earth stories. This one stood roughly 4 feet tall when it had been standing, which it no longer was. It had copper-gold scales that caught the bay lights and threw small warm reflections across the floor. Its eyes were amber, very large and very calm. It had folded all 4 of its limbs neatly beneath itself in a way that somehow looked like it was prepared to wait as long as necessary. It was holding a piece of paper. Devlin Ward had been an inspection officer for 9 years. He had processed smuggled fauna, undeclared weapons, 3 people trying to pass as cargo, and once an entire black market shipment of pressurized Earth coffee beans. He had not processed this before. He called Commander Petra Holtz. Petra arrived in Bay 12 within 4 minutes, which was fast for her. She stood beside Ward and looked at the creature on the floor and said nothing for a moment. "It came alone," she said. "Yes, Commander." "On that," she gestured at the battered shuttle. "Yes, Commander." "Any distress signals, any indication of a larger vessel nearby?" "No, Commander, it just docked, standard approach, followed all the entry protocols, better than most human pilots, honestly." Petra looked at the creature again. The creature looked back at her. Its amber eyes were patient in a way that made her feel slightly like she was the one being assessed. She crouched down to its level. This felt like the right thing to do. "Hello," she said slowly. "Do you understand me?" The creature tilted its head. Then it held out the piece of paper. Petra took it carefully. It was a photograph, printed on actual physical paper, which people almost never did anymore, which meant it was old. The image showed a human man in military fatigues, laughing at something off camera, holding a very small copper-scaled creature in the crook of one arm. The man was broad-shouldered and young in the photograph. The creature in his arms was tiny, barely larger than a human infant. Petra turned the photo over. On the back, in handwriting, "Suri and me, Fob Caro, 2216. She turned it back. She looked at the copper-gold creature sitting on her Bay 12 floor. She looked at the tiny copper creature in the photograph. 31 years. "What's your name?" she asked. The creature pointed at the photograph, at the small copper shape in the man's arms. Then it pointed at itself. Then it said, in careful and deliberate standard human, the only word it apparently knew for itself, "Suri." Devlin Ward made a sound behind her. Petra's brain was already moving. She stood up. She pulled out her station comm and opened a channel to the Dravik consulate, because a Dravik national arriving alone at a human way station was technically a diplomatic matter, and she was required to report it. The consulate officer who answered was formal, a little cold, and very clear. A retrieval envoy would be dispatched. 6 to 8 standard weeks. The hatchling was to be held in neutral processing. Petra disconnected the call. She looked at Suri. Suri looked at her, still holding the photograph, still sitting exactly as it had been sitting since it arrived, with the particular stillness of something that has already waited a very long time and knows how to keep waiting. Petra thought about what neutral processing looked like. She thought about the holding unit in sublevel 3, which was a grey room with a grey cot and a grey wall and nothing in it except grey. She put her comm away. Ward, she said. Yes, Commando. Get the second break room set up. Bring a cot, bring whatever our Xenodiet database says Dravik eat, and bring some water. Is that protocol, Commander? Petra looked at him. Nobody is putting this kid in a holding cell, she said. That's my protocol. She turned back to Suri and held the photograph out. Suri took it back with both forelimbs, carefully, the way someone handles something they have been carrying for a very long time and do not intend to put down. Petra said, Suri, we're going to find Orin. She did not know if Suri understood all of that, but Suri's amber eyes shifted and something in them moved, the way light moves when something stirs beneath still water, and that was enough. Ward led the way. Suri stood up and followed. The bay stayed quiet for a moment after they left. Then the cargo loaders started up again, and Waystation Dural went back to its noise, carrying one more secret in its walls than it had before. Dr. Arma Solis had not expected to spend her Tuesday doing this. She was the station's xenolinguistics officer, which usually meant filing translation requests, maintaining the language database, and occasionally helping a confused trader explain to a Varathi merchant that no, the hand gesture they had used did not mean what they thought it meant. It was quiet work. She liked quiet work. She did not expect to be sitting cross-legged on the floor of the second break room across from a copper-gold dragon, with a Dravik translation matrix propped between them on a folding tray, trying to understand a story that kept making her throat feel strange. Suri was patient. That was the word for it. Patient in a way that was not passive. It was the patience of someone who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had simply learned to carry it without showing the weight. The translation matrix helped. Dravik language was tonal and layered, and Suri's dialect was slightly archaic, but Arma had worked with it before. They moved slowly. Suri would speak. The matrix would render. Arma would ask a careful question. Suri would answer. Devlin Ward had come in to ask about lunch, and then sat down on the counter by the door and forgotten about lunch entirely. This is what they learned. Suri's mother had died on a battlefield called Fob Caro during the border conflict of 2215. The conflict had not been large or important by the standards of galactic history. It was the kind of war that happened at edges, in places most people did not look at. Suri had been newly hatched, barely a year old. A human soldier named Orin Vale had found the hatchling beside its mother. He had not left it there. For 3 years, Suri had lived in the forward operating base. Orin had fed it, taught it sounds, kept it safe in a place that was not safe for anything small. The other soldiers had tolerated this the way soldiers tolerate the things their sergeant does that they cannot argue with. Some of them had been fond of Suri. One had taught it to play a card game it did not fully understand, but enjoyed anyway. Then Orin's unit had been transferred. The war was ending. The base was being decommissioned. Orin had said goodbye. He had said, in broken Dravik syllables he had spent weeks learning, I'll come back for you, I promise. Suri had been processed into a Dravik youth collective shortly after. Standard procedure for a hatchling without family. The collective was not unkind. It was organized and proper and gave Suri everything it needed. It did not give Suri Orin. Arma asked very carefully, did you think he had forgotten? Suri considered this for a long moment. The amber eyes moved to the photograph, which was sitting on the tray beside the translation matrix. No, Suri said through the matrix. Dravik, do not forget. I did not believe he had forgotten either. I believed something had stopped him. But you waited, Arma said. Yes. For how long? Another pause. 28 years. I did not know where to look. I did not have the resources to search. When I did, I began. Ward made a sound from the counter. Arma glanced at him. He was staring at the floor with an expression she could not quite name. You searched for 3 years, Arma asked. Yes, the Accord records are not easy to navigate for a Dravik without human clearances. I found a military archive on a secondary system. It had a name, a unit, a last known posting. I followed the postings. It took time. You did this alone. Surrey tilted its head. Who else would do it? Armor did not have an answer for that. And you came here, she said, to Waystation Dural. The last record I found placed him in this sector. I did not have a precise address. I thought if I came to the nearest human station, someone would know. Humans know each other. Surrey paused. You have many ways of knowing each other. Ward laughed suddenly, a short surprised sound. Then he pressed his hand over his mouth. Armor looked back at Surrey. She had been a xenolinguistics officer for 14 years. She had documented dying languages, translated distress calls, helped negotiate trade terms in 11 different tongues. She thought she was not easily moved by words. She was wrong about that. Surrey, she said quietly, how old are you? 51 of your years. And the Dravik, you remember everything from the beginning. Yes, always, we do not lose memory, it is not possible for us. Armor nodded slowly. So you remember the fob, you remember Orin. I remember everything he ever said to me, Surrey said simply. I remember the sound of his boots. I remember the card game. I remember the morning he left. I remember the exact words. The amber eyes were steady. I will always remember them. Ward got off the counter. He walked to the door. He stopped with his back to them. Armor heard him exhale. I need to make a call, he said, and his voice was rougher than usual. Ward, Armor said. I'm fine, he wasn't looking at them. We need to find this guy. He pushed through the door. Armor sat with Surrey in the quiet break room. Outside, the station hummed. Ships docked and departed. The ordinary business of the universe continued. Surrey picked up the photograph and held it in both forelimbs, the way it had been holding it since it arrived. Armor said, we'll find him. Surrey did not answer. It did not need to. It had already believed that for a very long time. Finding a retired human soldier turned out to be two very different problems, depending on who was trying. Petra filed the official request to the Human Accord Military Records Office at 800 hours. The automated response came back in 40 seconds. It informed her that records from Fob Caro fell under the end of conflict privacy protocols, established in 2219 to protect the identities of veterans from border actions that had been politically complicated at the time. A formal access request would require documentation, departmental approval, and a processing window of approximately 4 months. Petra stared at the response. She printed it. She folded it in half. She put it in her desk drawer, which was where she put things she intended to be angry about later when she had time. Then she walked down to the inspection office, where Devlin Ward was already at his personal terminal. I'm not doing anything official, he said before she could speak. I didn't say anything. I'm aware I'm posting on the VOC board, Veteran Outreach Community. It's a private network, completely informal. I have an account because my uncle used to serve. And what are you posting? Ward read from his screen, looking for Orin Vale, served Fob Caro 2213 to 2217. Someone is trying to return something to him. Urgent. Petra looked at it. That's all. That's all it needs to be. She went back to her office. She had paperwork. She had 3 docking disputes, a fuel billing error, and a report to file about the gravity plate in Bay 9. She worked through all of them. 6 hours later, Ward knocked on her door. 17 responses, he said. He was holding a tablet, and his expression was something she had not seen from him before, a kind of stunned amazement, like a man watching weather do something impossible. 17 in 6 hours. I've got his former unit commanding officer. She's retired now, she cried on the voice message. I've got 4 guys who served with him at Caro directly. 2 of them cried also. I've got someone who says they know someone who knows his current contact address. And I've got a pilot named Rafe who owns a certified long-range shuttle and is offering to fly anyone anywhere for free, and I quote, just tell me it's real. Petra was quiet for a moment. 9 hours, she said. Sorry. It took 9 hours total. You posted at 8:10. It's 17:03. Yes. We have his address. Yes. She leaned back in her chair. Outside her office window, she could see the jump gate lanes, the slow pulse of ships moving through a chord space. 31 species, hundreds of stations, thousands of years of organized civilization. 9 hours. Contact him, she said. Carefully, don't overwhelm the man. Ward was already moving. He almost ran into Councillor Veth in the corridor. Veth was the Dravik consulate envoy, arrived 2 weeks early, which Petra had not been expecting and which she suspected was because someone senior in the consulate wanted eyes on the situation. Veth was tall, silver-scaled, formal in the precise way that senior Dravik officials were formal, and had spent most of the morning observing the station with an expression that was difficult to read. Veth had been standing near the inspection office, watching. Ward sidestepped politely. Veth watched him go. Then Veth turned to Petra, who had followed into the corridor. A question, Veth said. The translation earpiece rendered the words in flat, precise, standard human. Of course, Petra said. This network, the one your officer used. Veth paused as if choosing words. Who administers it? No one, it's informal. Veterans who want to stay in contact. There is no governing body, no official mandate. No, it's just people who serve together and don't want to lose track of each other. Veth was still for a moment, and they responded to a request for assistance for a stranger. For someone who served, that's not quite the same as a stranger for them. Another pause, longer, and the pilot, this Rafe, he does not know the veteran, he does not know the Dravik, he offered transport at no cost. Petra thought about how to explain Rafe. She decided the explanation was probably not improvable. He just wants to help, she said. Veth looked at her. The silver eyes were hard to read, but something in them was working through a thought. Your species, Veth said slowly, does this often. Does what? Assists, without being asked, without formal obligation. Petra shrugged. When it matters. Veth said nothing. But Petra noticed that when the envoy walked away, Veth pulled out a small recording device and spoke quietly into it for almost a full minute. She did not know what was said. She found out later when Veth's cultural report circulated through the Convergence Advisory Council. The section about that conversation was 4 paragraphs. The last line read, "The commander did not appear to understand why this was remarkable. That may be the most remarkable part." The call to Orin Vale, connected at 1847 station time. Ward handled it. He had asked Petra if she wanted to, and she had said no, Ward should do it. Ward had been the one who posted. Ward had been the one who found him. Ward had earned that call. She stood in the doorway of the inspection office and watched. Ward explained carefully. He said fob caro. He said 2216. He said copper scales and a photograph and a shuttle that should not have made it through a gate. The old man on the screen went very still. Ward turned the camera toward the break room. Through the open door, Surrey was visible, sitting with its photograph, completely still in the way it had been still since it arrived. Surrey, the old man said. His voice was rough, like something that had not been used in a while had just been found and asked to work again. Surrey's amber eyes moved to the screen. Orin, Surrey said. The break room was quiet. The inspection office was quiet. Somewhere deep in the station, the gravity plate in Bay 9 made its usual complaint. Because the universe does not stop for moments, it only makes room for them. Ward looked at Petra. Petra looked at the screen, at the old man with white hair and wet eyes, and at Surrey, who had not moved but whose whole body had changed in some way she could not name, the way a room changes when something long absent finally comes back into it. Get him here, she said, whatever it takes. Getting Orin Vale to Waystation Dural should have been simple. It was not simple. He was 81. His physician, a sharp-voiced woman named Dr. Nara Bale, had cleared him for travel with the energy of someone who was not really giving him a choice. But the agricultural station where Orin lived required 30 days' notice for extended absence from tenants, his personal transport. A 12-year-old orbital hopper he called the Argument had not been gate certified since 2239 and would not pass a jump inspection without 3 weeks of work. Commercial passage from the Fenwick Belt to Way Station, Dural, crossed 2-star systems and cost more than Orin had liquid in his accounts. And those were only the human problems. The Dravik consulate had escalated. Councillor Veth delivered the news to Petra personally, standing in her office with the formal stillness of someone delivering an unwanted message they had not written. The memory custodian, the senior Dravik legal body governing promise law, had been briefed on the situation. Their position was that the promise spoken at Fob Caro may not constitute a binding covenant under Dravik civil code, as it had been spoken under wartime duress by a non-Dravik national who had not undergone formal promise registration. A review was required. Suri was to be returned to Dravik space immediately pending the outcome. And if Suri does not want to go? Petra asked. Veth was quiet for a half-second. The consulate expects compliance. Of course, Petra said. I'll speak with Suri. She spoke with Suri. What followed was the most effective non-violent protest Way Station Dural had ever hosted. Suri sat down in the center of the break room floor. It crossed all 4 limbs beneath itself in the same position it had arrived in. It placed the photograph in its lap, and it did not move. For 16 hours, it did not move. Petra did not attempt to force the issue. She sent a message to the consulate explaining that she lacked the security personnel to remove a Dravik national against their will without risking a diplomatic incident, and recommended a brief extension while the situation was assessed. The consulate replied that it would consider this. The consideration took long enough to be useful. Meanwhile, Hadar Morse had gotten involved. Hadar Morse was 84 years old, retired brigadier general, and the former commanding officer of Orin's unit at Fob Caro. Ward had reached her through the veteran network. She had cried on the voice message, but that was done with now. Hadar did not stay in emotional states for long when there were logistics to manage. She made one call, to a contact she had at the Human Accord Diplomatic Service, a woman named Director Pell, whom she had known for 30 years and was owed a considerable favor by. The favor was called in. 40 minutes later, Orin Vale had a humanitarian cultural exchange clearance, an obscure designation buried in the Accord's 2198 diplomatic code, originally written for academic researchers wanting to engage with alien nationals in transit. It had been used 11 times in its history. It cleared him for immediate travel to any way station for purposes of cultural engagement with an alien national. No processing window, no 30-day notice clause. The agricultural station's administrator, upon reading the clearance documentation, decided that an 81-year-old veteran with a diplomatic clearance was someone else's problem and signed the absence form in under a minute. The gate certification problem was solved by Rafe, who had already landed on the agricultural station's orbital pad in a ship that was certified, fueled, and had a spare bunk. Rafe was 29 years old, ran a small independent courier service in the Fenwick sector, and had seen Ward's post on the VOC board and driven 4 hours to respond to it. He had, in the time since, made himself at home in Orin's kitchen, befriended Orin's elderly cat, and reorganized the pantry in a way Orin did not ask for but could not argue with. Orin stood in the kitchen doorway with his travel bag over one shoulder and said, "You didn't have to do this." Rafe looked up from the pantry. "I know. You don't know me. I know what Ward posted." Orin was quiet. "Also," Rafe said, "your cat is named Admiral, and she has been sitting on my lap for 2 hours, so I feel like we have an understanding." Dr. Bale arrived at the door with her own bag. Orin looked at her. "Nara, you are not coming." "I am your physician," she said, stepping past him into the kitchen. You are 81. You are traveling across 2 systems on a stranger's ship to meet a space dragon who believes in you. I am absolutely coming. I don't need supervision. Everyone needs supervision, Orin. The difference is whether they admit it. She put her bag down next to Rafe's. Rafe looked at Orin. I like her. The ship departed 6 hours later. Estimated travel time to Waystation Dural, 11 days. Petra received the departure notification and began to do the only thing left in her power. She stalled. The consulate sent a formal inquiry. She responded with a detailed station report that addressed most of the inquiry except the most important part, and flagged 2 sections as requiring clarification, which would need to be submitted in writing, which gave her 4 days. The consulate submitted the written clarification. She acknowledged receipt and initiated a mandatory 24-hour review period as per station protocol, which she had written into station protocol that morning. She received a second formal inquiry, more pointed. She replied that she was consulting with her legal advisor. She did not have a legal advisor. She contacted the Accord Waystation Administrative Guild and asked if anyone could serve as a temporary legal advisor on short notice. Someone named Buren, semi-retired, bored, and delighted by the situation when it was explained to him, volunteered. Buren generated a 12-page legal brief questioning the jurisdictional authority of the Dravik consulate over a Dravik national on a human waystation in a matter involving a human individual, while simultaneously acknowledging the validity of Dravik promise law as a cultural framework deserving of consideration, and recommending a period of no less than 10 days for appropriate review. Veth read the brief. Veth set it down. Veth said nothing to Petra for a long time. Then Veth said, "This is the document your legal advisor produced." "Yes," Petra said. A pause. "It is very thorough. He has a lot of time on his hands." Veth looked at her. Something shifted in the silver eyes. Not warmth, exactly. The Dravik did not do warmth in the human way, but something that recognized what was happening here and chose not to challenge it. 10 days, Veth said. "Thank you, counselor." Veth turned and left. Petra went to check on Suri, who had finally, after 16 hours, uncrossed its limbs and accepted a bowl of warm nutrient broth. It was sitting in the break room with the photograph propped against the wall in front of it, watching the door with the particular attention of someone listening for a sound they have not yet heard but know is coming. 10 days, the ship was 11 out. Petra sat down across from Suri. "He's on his way," she said. Suri did not respond in words, but one forelimb extended slowly across the table, and the copper-gold claws rested, very lightly, on the back of Petra's hand. She stayed until Suri fell asleep. Nobody announced it. That was Petra's decision, made quietly the night before. No station-wide message, no formal gathering, no ceremony. She had been to enough ceremonies in her life to know that they often served the witnesses more than the people at the center, and what was going to happen in Bay 7 belonged to Orin and Suri and no one else. But the staff of Waystation Dural had a way of knowing things. By the time the docking notification came through at 6:40 hours, the corridors between Bay 7 and the second break room were populated, not crowded, just occupied. Technicians who had somewhere to be that happened to be along that route. Cargo supervisors checking something that required them to be on that level. Dr. Arma Solis, who was supposed to be off duty, standing with a cup of tea near a corridor junction. Counselor Veth, who said nothing and stood very still against the far wall with his hands behind his back. Nobody said they were there for this, but they were all there for this. Petra stood at the Bay 7 entrance. Rafe's ship docked clean, the airlock cycled, 3 people emerged. Rafe came first, stepping back immediately to lean against the wall with his arms folded, taking himself out of the moment with the instinct of someone who understands when they are not the main character. Dr. Bale came second, carrying a small medical bag and positioning herself 1 step behind and to the left, close enough to act if needed, far enough to allow. Orin came last. He was shorter than the photograph. That was the first thing. The photograph was 31 years old, and the man in it had been young and broad, and time had done what it always does. He moved with a cane, not leaning on it heavily, but using it. His hair was white. His face had the particular quality of old faces that have spent a lot of time outside, weathered and creased in ways that suggested a life of looking at things. He stopped at the bay entrance and looked at Petra. "Commander Holt," he said. His voice was steady. "Sergeant Vale," she said. She had decided on the rank. He had earned it, and she thought he would want it. "We are glad you made it." "I made a promise," he said, as if that explained the 11-day journey, the two-system crossing, the diplomatic clearances, all of it. Perhaps it did. Petra stepped aside. "This way." She led him through the corridor. She did not look at the staff lining the route, but she was aware of them, of the way the silence moved with Orin as he walked, the way people who worked in the noise of a busy way station managed, without discussing it, to be completely quiet. Orin walked. He did not look at anyone. He looked at the floor ahead of him, and his jaw was set, and his cane tapped a steady rhythm on the metal. The break room door was open. The light inside was warm. Someone, Petra suspected Ward, had adjusted the lighting sometime in the past day, tuning it away from the standard white-blue station light toward something softer. Suri was sitting in the center of the room. It had been sitting upright since 600, when Petra had come to tell it the ship had cleared the final gate. It had said nothing. It had simply sat up straighter and placed the photograph on the table in front of it and watched the door. When Orin appeared in the doorway, Suri went very still, the kind of still that is different from waiting still, the kind that comes after. Orin stopped. The corridor behind him was completely silent. He stood in the doorframe for a long moment, looking at Suri, at the copper-gold scales, now full-sized and catching the warm light, at the amber eyes, at the photograph on the table between them. Then he spoke in Dravic. Petra had asked Arma what he had said afterward. Arma had taken a moment before answering. The words were broken, she had said. The accent was wrong in several places. He had clearly learned them phonetically, the way someone learns a phrase in a language they do not speak because they need to say one specific thing, but the meaning was exact. The tonal register was the one used for the fulfillment of a spoken covenant. In Dravic grammar, you could not accidentally use that register. You had to choose it. He had said, "I came back." Suri made a sound, low, resonant, rising at the end. The Dravic word for the acknowledgement of a fulfilled promise, the closure of a covenant, the sound a door makes when it finally closes properly after years of sitting open in the draft. In the corridor, Councillor Veth made an involuntary sound and pressed one hand briefly over his chest. Orin crossed the room. He moved slowly with the cane. He sat down in the chair across from Suri. They looked at each other across the small table with the photograph between them. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Then Suri reached into the carry sack it had kept against its side since Bay 12. It withdrew a small object and placed it on the table and pushed it carefully across. It was a metal token, old, scratched, the kind issued as civilian safety clearance for forward operating bases during the border conflict. The metal was worn smooth in places from handling. The Caro insignia was still visible. On the back, a name, pressed into the metal, Ovale. Suri said, "You left this, I kept it." Orin picked it up. He looked at it for a long moment. His hand closed around it, knuckles white. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry it took so long." Suri tilted its head, the gesture of confusion at an unnecessary statement. The amber eyes were steady and clear. "You came," Suri said. "That is the promise. There is no late." Outside the break room, in the corridor, someone let out a long, slow breath that they had apparently been holding since Bay 7. Rafe, still leaning against the wall near the bay entrance where no one could see him, rubbed his eyes with the back of one hand and looked at the ceiling for a while. Dr. Bale stood at the edge of the break room doorway. She did not go in. She watched the old man and the dragon sitting across from each other at a small table in a warm room in the middle of deep space, and she thought about all the years that had sat between that moment and this one, and all the distance, and what it took to cross both. She thought some people just do what they say, even when no one is watching, even when it takes 31 years. She stepped back from the door, very quietly, so as not to interrupt. 3 months later, a document circulated through the Galactic Convergence Advisory Council that no one had expected and everyone read twice. It was 14 pages in Dravic legal script, issued by the memory custodian after a formal review of the Fob Caro Covenant. Legal documents from the memory custodian were not normally interesting. They were dense, careful, and written in a tone that suggested the authors considered emotions to be a minor clerical error. This one was different. The first 12 pages were standard, review of the promise's conditions, an examination of wartime covenant precedents, a discussion of non-Dravic promise givers and their standing under civil code. Those 12 pages were dense and careful in the usual way. The last 2 pages were not. The memory custodian's conclusion stated that the promise was valid, the covenant stood, and Orin Vale was formally recognized in Dravic civil record as having fulfilled an interspecies promise of protection and return. The acknowledgement carried weight. It was the first time a human had been entered into Dravic covenant record. It would be taught in Dravic legal education as a precedent. The final paragraph of the ruling said, "It is the finding of this body that the human's intent was never in question. The delay was circumstantial, not willful." The memory custodian further notes that the individual in question, upon being made aware of the outstanding covenant, crossed interstellar distance at advanced age, with no legal obligation, no formal requirement, and no material benefit. He came because he said he would. This body has no further comment. The ruling was sent to Orin by secure channel. He read it on a bench in the Waystation Dural Observation Bay, with Suri sitting beside him and Admiral the cat, who had arrived on Rafe's return trip because it had seemed wrong to leave her behind, asleep in a patch of light nearby. Orin read the final paragraph twice. Then he folded the document and put it in his coat pocket. "They wrote me up," he said. Suri tilted its head. "It is a significant honor. I just showed up." "Yes," Suri said, "that is what makes it significant." Councillor Veth's report reached the Convergence Council 1 week later. It was 12 pages, submitted under the heading of Cultural Observation, and it covered everything Veth had witnessed at Waystation Dural from the moment of Suri's arrival to the moment Orin walked through the break room door. Report was methodical. Veth documented the veteran network, its lack of administration, its lack of mandate, its response speed, the emotional quality of its members' replies. Veth documented Rafe, described simply as a civilian with no connection to either party who had provided transport and remained for the duration without being asked. Veth documented Dr. Bale, who had decided without being invited that her presence was required and had acted on that decision without hesitation. Veth documented Petra Holt, who had stalled a consulate diplomatic process for 11 days using bureaucratic tools she had partly invented. Veth documented the corridor, the staff of a busy transit station who had found reasons to be present for the walk between Bay 7 and the break room, who had been silent without being asked, who had understood what the moment required and had collectively provided it. The conclusion ran 2 pages. Most of it was careful and measured. The last section was not. This analyst entered this observation expecting to document an anomaly, Veth wrote. A single individual crossing improbable distance for an unusual reason. What was documented instead was a pattern. Every human who became aware of the situation chose to assist. The choice was not incentivized, not obligated, and in several cases actively inconvenient. The pilot named Rafe lost 11 days of paid work. The physician named Bale had no medical incident to attend. The commander risked professional friction with a consulate. The retired general called in a significant favor. None of them were asked to do any of this. They were simply aware that something was needed, and they moved toward it. This analyst does not have a clean framework for this behavior. Dravik act from covenant. Others in the convergence act from hierarchy, from contract, from species obligation. Humans appear to act from something that does not have a name in this analyst's language. The closest translation is the awareness that someone is trying to do a hard thing and the belief that they should not have to do it alone. It is this analyst's assessment that the convergence has underestimated the weight of this quality. It does not display well. It does not show on fleet registers or economic models. It shows in corridors. It shows in messages sent at 8:10 that generate 17 responses by 1700. It shows in a pilot who drives 4 hours and reorganizes a stranger's pantry. They showed up. There is no phrase in formal Dravik that captures what this means. Perhaps the humans are right to leave it unnamed. Some things named too precisely lose their nature. The report circulated. It was not classified. Members of 23 species eventually read it in translation. On Waystation Dural, none of this was especially visible. Things went mostly back to normal. The gravity plate in Bay 9 was finally fixed. Ward was promoted to senior inspector. Dr. Solis published a paper on Dravik covenant language tonal structure that got some attention in academic circles. Orin had filed for extended residency. He had cited health reasons, the need for continued xenomedical monitoring, and the fact that he was a formally recognized figure in Dravik civil record, and his presence contributed to interspecies cultural engagement. Petra had approved the application in under a minute. Suri's status had been reclassified from extended cultural exchange guest to permanent cultural liaison, a category Petra had written into the station's administrative code on a quiet afternoon. The Dravik consulate had been notified. They had not objected. On a grey station evening, Ward found Suri alone in the observation bay again, standing at the wide transparent panel, watching the jump gate lanes. The gates pulsed in the dark, great rings of curved light, and through them the shapes of ships moved in slow procession, 100 species going about the ordinary business of the universe. Ward sat nearby. "Thinking again," he said. Suri was quiet for a moment. Then, "I am thinking about distance. I crossed a great deal of it. I did not know if it would matter." "Did it?" Suri turned its amber eyes toward him. "He is here," it said simply. "I am here. The promise is closed." A pause. "Everything I crossed to get here was worth crossing." Ward nodded. They sat together in the observation bay as the gate lanes pulsed, and the ships moved, and the stars beyond the glass were old and indifferent and very far away. The photograph was propped on the ledge of the viewport, the human man laughing, the small copper shape in his arms, Caro, 2216. Beside the photograph, not touching it, Orin's token, returned after 31 years to the hand it had been lost from. Outside, the universe continued, enormous and indifferent and full of distances that seemed impossible until someone decided to cross them. Someone always decided to cross them. That had always been the thing about humans. They showed up.